The sky cracked open with thunder, not from a storm, but from ships tearing through the atmosphere. The capital city of Lysara, once peaceful and glowing with alien elegance, trembled under fire. No one had expected war to come this quickly. Princess Arali stood on the palace balcony, her golden eyes wide with fear. She was only 12, a child of royal blood, yet her instincts screamed louder than her training. The enemy wasn't just at the gates, they were inside the walls. Guards shouted. Explosions boomed. Her mother, Queen Saelith, had vanished from the chamber minutes before the attack, escorted by her war advisors. Arali had been told to hide, but she didn't want to run. She didn't want to be alone. Then, from the shadows of the corridor, a figure stumbled out. Not a soldier, not a Lysarian, a human. Covered in soot, blood on his brow, wearing a tattered uniform with no royal insignia. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. He said her name like he'd been waiting to find her. You're the princess. Right? I was told to find you and get you out alive, he said, kneeling before her like she was the only thing that mattered. She didn't understand who he was or why he was there, but something in his voice made her trust him. His name was Carter. He was no knight, not in the traditional sense. Just a human technician caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe the right place, depending on how one saw destiny. He took her hand. It was warm, firm, protective. We don't have much time, he said. They're coming for you first. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was crushing. Together, they ran through shattered halls and burning gardens. The royal palace was falling apart with each passing second. Every corner they turned, Carter pushed her behind him, shielding her with nothing but his body and a stolen plasma pistol. Arali had never seen someone fight like this. Not a warrior. Not a royal guard. Just a human with grit, moving with fear in his chest but fire in his arms. She watched him take a blast to the shoulder without screaming. They ducked into the library. Ancient scrolls burned around them, light flickering against stained glass walls. Arali coughed from the smoke, but Carter pressed a wet cloth over her mouth and signaled for silence. Footsteps echoed beyond the door. She leaned closer to him, whispering, "Why are you helping me?" His reply was quiet, but it shook something inside her. "Because no one else can right now. And you deserve to live." When the door burst open, Carter fired without hesitation. He didn't aim to kill, just to distract. He threw a chair, yanked Arali through a side passage, and slammed a wall panel shut behind them. Her heart beat. So hard it hurt. Through secret tunnels, they moved like shadows. Arali's dress tore against the stone, her crown scratched and dulled, but she never let go of Carter's hand. She never looked back. In the silence between footfalls, she began to see something in him. He was rough, dirty, and not from her world. But he kept looking at her like she mattered more than anything else in that burning palace. Outside the city, the view was worse. Smoke curled into the clouds. The once blue skies were thick with enemy ships. Arali felt tears on her cheeks but didn't remember crying. Carter wiped them gently with his sleeve. They had to cross the garden bridge to reach the old royal shelter. Beneath the cliffs. But the path was exposed, and the enemy was closing in fast. Carter looked at her and said, "You'll have to trust me again." She nodded without speaking. As they ran, energy blasts scorched the stones behind them. Carter took another hit, this time to the leg. He stumbled but didn't fall. He carried her the rest of the way, breath heavy, arms trembling. When the shelter doors finally closed behind them, Arali collapsed to the floor. Carter leaned against the wall, face pale, his uniform soaked in blood. He looked at her and smiled like he had done his duty. "I promised someone I'd bring you to safety," he whispered. "And I keep my promises." Carter woke up inside the shelter with pain shooting through his leg. The burn from the plasma hit had worsened overnight. He bit down on a cloth to keep himself quiet while cleaning the wound. He didn't want to scare the princess. Princess Arali had barely slept. She sat beside him, her golden gown now dirty and torn, but her crown still rested on her head like she was born to wear it. She looked small in that wide stone room, but her eyes didn't show fear anymore. "Is it bad?" she asked, pointing to his leg. He nodded but forced a smile. "I've had worse," he said. She didn't believe him, but she nodded back like she did. Food was limited, just a few survival bars left in an old ration pack. Carter gave her the bigger share. She tried to argue, but he only said, "You're royalty. It's your right." She gave him a sharp look and replied, "Not when you're the one bleeding." Outside the shelter, Lysara was still burning. They could hear the rumble of engines in the sky. The enemy hadn't left. They were searching. The palace had fallen. But the war was not over. And if they found the princess, they'd never let her love. Carter activated a damaged communicator, fiddling with wires and circuits until static gave way to broken words. Survivors' East Tunnel backup delayed hold position. It was enough to give him hope. "We'll need to move," he said. "The longer we wait, the higher the risk." Arali didn't argue. She simply stood up, tied her gown to make it easier to run, and helped him to his feet. They moved slowly through the old water tunnels under the city. Pipes groaned above them, rats scattered at their feet. Carter leaned on a broken staff to walk, and Arali kept checking behind them, always alert. At one turn, they stopped suddenly. Voices echoed ahead, enemy patrol. Arali's breathing became fast and shallow. Carter pulled her behind an old water valve and whispered, "Stay silent." No matter what, the enemy passed within inches of them, their shadows stretching across the wall. Arali held her breath so tightly that her chest hurt. Carter gripped her hand and never flinched. When it was clear, they kept moving. Time blurred. Every step hurt Carter, but he refused to stop. He knew the princess couldn't survive alone. He had to get her out, no matter the cost. They reached an old transport bay, half buried under rubble and dust. Among the debris, Carter spotted something unbelievable, an old scout shuttle. Abandoned, dusty, but mostly intact. It could be their way out. Carter spent hours repairing the power cell using parts from his gear. Sparks flew. Arali helped where she could, handing tools and holding panels. She didn't speak much, but her focus never wavered. Just before nightfall, the engines hummed softly. Not full power, but enough to fly. Carter gave her a hopeful look. "We've got one shot," he said. "Ready to try?" She answered with a single nod. They took off just as an enemy drone flew by. The shuttle shook, warning lights flashing. Arali buckled in beside him, staring out the window as her world shrank beneath them. Missile locks activated on their tail. Carter cursed under his breath and dived the shuttle through the canyon walls, dodging blasts by inches. The princess screamed once, then went silent, trusting him to fly. The sky turned red as fire lit the horizon. Carter pushed the controls to the limit. "Just a little farther," he muttered. "We just need to reach the mountains." Signal stronger there. Suddenly, a hit. The shuttle jerked sideways. Alarms blared. One engine was gone. They were falling fast. Carter shouted, "Brace!" As the ground rushed up to meet them, metal tore against rock. Trees shattered under the crash. The shuttle skidded and flipped once before landing in silence. Dust filled the air. Carter's vision faded to black. When he opened his eyes, everything hurt, but he was alive. He turned to his side. Arali slumped in her seat, unconscious, but breathing. He exhaled in relief. The comm system sparked to life. Signal acquired. Survivors located. Sending rescue. Carter barely smiled before darkness claimed him again. Carter awoke to the sound of boots crunching gravel. His eyes blinked against the bright morning light, filtering through the shattered remains of the shuttle canopy. Pain roared through his side, but he forced himself to sit up. Arali was gone. Panic rushed into his chest like a wave. He tried to stand but collapsed with a grunt. Then he saw her just outside the wreck, speaking with armored figures bearing the Lysarian crest. They weren't enemies. They were royal guards. Somehow the emergency beacon had worked. Carter slumped back, chest rising in shallow breaths. He had gotten her this far. A female Lysarian soldier knelt beside him and injected a stim into his arm. "Rest, human," she said softly. "You've done enough." The princess is safe now, but Carter wasn't ready to let go. His voice was hoarse when he asked, "Where is she?" "Is she hurt?" The soldier shook her head. "Not hurt. Just frightened. She hasn't let go of your name since we found her." Later that day, they were flown to a secure mountain outpost. Hidden among cliffs and guarded by loyal forces, it was one of the last Lysarian strongholds not overrun by the invaders. Carter was placed in a recovery chamber. His wounds were cleaned and sealed. The alien tech worked fast, but his body was still weak. Every hour, he asked about the princess. Finally, after 2 days, she appeared. Dressed in clean robes of blue and silver, her hair brushed, her crown restored. But her eyes looked tired, older than her years. She sat beside his bed without saying a word. Carter looked at her and smiled. "You made it," he said. She nodded and whispered, "Because of you." Then she reached out and held his hand the way he had once held hers. Their bond was no longer just protector and royal. It had become something deeper, something built on trust, fear, and fire. They had survived together. News came in from the front lines. The enemy was pushing harder. Lysarian forces were scattering. Queen Saelith had not been seen since the palace fell. Some feared she was dead, but Arali refused to believe it. "My mother is alive," she told Carter. "I feel it. She would never leave without trying to find me." Carter didn't question her instinct. "Then we find her," he said. "But you can't do it alone. And I'm not leaving your side." High Command protested. A human? With the princess? It broke every rule. But Arali didn't care. She demanded Carter be made her personal guardian. Not just a protector, but her chosen shield. They gave her what she asked. The court had lost too much. A future queen needed strength beside her. And Carter had already proven himself stronger than most. They left the outpost under cover of night. Arali wore armor fitted to her frame, still elegant, but built for battle. Carter had a fresh suit too, reinforced with Lysarian alloy. They looked mismatched but unstoppable. Their goal was clear: reach the northern refugee camps where survivors claimed to have seen Queen Saelith. Between them lay forests filled with enemy scouts and ancient ruins crawling with dangers. But nothing would stop Arali now. And Carter wouldn't let her walk that road alone. They were no longer hiding. They were searching. Together, as they crossed the valley under starlight, Arali turned to Carter and said, "If something happens to me, promise me you'll keep fighting." He looked at her with steady eyes. "I already promised I'd protect you. That means until the end." She smiled, just a little. It wasn't a smile of a child anymore. It was the smile of someone ready to lead. The forest air was heavy and damp, filled with distant screeches and rustling leaves. Arali kept her hand near her weapon while Carter led the way using a handheld scanner taken from the outpost. They moved cautiously, stepping over roots and ducking beneath low branches. The trees whispered with the wind, but neither of them spoke. Every sound could be a trap. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Carter had healed, but not completely. His legs still throbbed, especially when climbing. But he didn't complain. Arali noticed, though, and slowed her pace just enough so he wouldn't fall behind. Hours passed before they reached the ruins. Broken statues, shattered towers, and vines wrapped around what once might have been a Lysarian temple. Their destination lay beneath it, in an old escape tunnel once used by royals. Arali pressed her hand to a stone panel. and it glowed faintly. A section of the floor shifted and slid open. She looked at Carter with a proud grin and said, "Told you I remembered the old codes." Inside, the tunnel was cold and damp. Water dripped from the ceiling. Their boots echoed softly as they moved deeper underground. This place hadn't been used in years, but the path was still clear. Carter's scanner beeped faintly. Life signs, weak but present. "Someone's here," he whispered. O'Reilly's eyes widened, her heart racing. Could it be her mother? Could the Queen have survived all this time underground? As they turned a corner, lights flickered ahead. Then, a voice called out, weak but commanding, "Stop where you are." Carter raised his hand slowly, stepping forward with O'Reilly behind him. From the shadows, a guard stepped out. His armor was cracked, his face bruised, but his weapon steady. Then, another figure followed, tall, regal, wounded, but still proud. Queen Saelith. O'Reilly's breath caught. "Mother," she whispered. The Queen froze for a second, then dropped her staff and opened her arms. O'Reilly rushed into them, tears falling freely. Carter stood back, watching as mother and daughter embraced. His hand moved to his chest without thinking. For the first time in days, he let himself feel relief. Queen Saelith looked at him next. Her voice was tired but filled with strength. "You are the human who brought her here?" He nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty. I kept her alive, she did the rest." The Queen smiled slightly. "Then I owe you more than words." "You've done what entire fleets failed to do. You brought back the future of Lysara." They spent the night in the underground shelter. Guards told stories of their long retreat, how they were forced to hide when the capital fell. Supplies were low, but hope had returned with the princess. O'Reilly sat beside her mother, holding her hand tightly. "We're not safe yet," she said. "The enemy is still searching. But we have something now we didn't before." "What's that?" the Queen asked. O'Reilly looked at Carter and answered, "Him." The Queen nodded slowly. "Then he will stay with us, as protector. As family." The next morning, they planned the escape. The upper forest was too dangerous now, but a supply route still existed through the canyon caves. If they could reach the mountains beyond, a transport fleet awaited. Carter examined the old maps and routes. It wouldn't be easy. Landslides had blocked most of the original exits. But with explosives and careful planning, it could work. They moved at dawn. A small team of guards, the Queen, the Princess, and Carter. Every step felt like walking between survival and death. But they had no other choice. As they approached the canyon mouth, distant engines echoed overhead. Drones were scanning again. Carter signaled for silence and motioned everyone into cover beneath the ridge. Suddenly, a flash. A patrol spotted movement. Blaster fire lit the air. The guards fired back, shielding the Queen. Carter grabbed O'Reilly and pulled her down behind. A broken wall. He covered her with his body as shots slammed into the rocks nearby. "Stay down," he growled. "Don't move until I say." Blaster fire echoed through the canyon as dust filled the air. Carter shielded O'Reilly with his body, keeping her head low. Around them, rocks splintered and chunks of stone broke away from the walls. Queen Saelith's guards fought hard, taking cover behind boulders and firing with deadly precision. But they were outnumbered. The enemy had brought drones and fast attack bikes that zipped across the ridge. Above, Carter peeked out just long enough to spot a gap in the formation. "We can run for it," he said. O'Reilly didn't hesitate. She followed him without a word. Trusting his instincts like always, they dashed across the canyon floor, blaster bolts slicing the air near their heads. Carter led her toward an old mine shaft he had seen on the map. It wasn't safe, but it was cover. The Queen and her guards moved to follow, but another drone swooped down. One of the guards shoved Saelith aside and took the full blast to his chest. He fell silently, armor cracked and smoking. Carter turned back in time to see the Queen stumble. Without thinking, he ran to her, grabbed her arm, and hauled her into the shaft with a rally. The others followed, dragging the wounded behind them. Inside it was dark and narrow. Carter activated his wrist light, casting a blue glow on the damp walls. "We keep moving," he said. "They'll scan this place soon." The mine tunnel twisted and sloped deeper into the earth. Old supports groaned under their weight. Some parts had collapsed, but Carter found a narrow crawl space that kept them moving forward. They crawled through dirt and broken stone until the air changed. Fresh wind flowed through the cracks. "We're near an exit," Carter said. Everyone moved faster, desperate for open sky. Suddenly, the wall beside them shook. An explosion rocked the tunnel. The enemy had fired a seismic charge into the rock. Dust and stones rained down as the roof groaned and split. "Move!" Carter shouted. He pushed Arali forward and turned back to help the Queen. Another blast hit nearby, throwing him into the wall. His vision blurred, ears ringing. Arali screamed his name, but he waved her on. "Go! Get out of here!" he shouted. The roof began to collapse behind him. He crawled, one hand dragging his leg, the other reaching for light. Just as the tunnel gave way, two hands grabbed him, Arali and the Queen. Together, they pulled him free as the ceiling crashed behind. They lay on the ground outside, coughing and gasping for air. The sky above was cloudy, but open. They had reached the mountain pass. In the distance, small shapes moved toward them. Familiar ships. Friendly ships. The fleet had arrived. A transport landed in the field, ramp descending with a hiss. Medics ran to help them. Carter tried to stand, but the Queen placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Rest, you've earned it." Inside the ship, Arali stayed beside him. Her hand never left his. She spoke quietly, telling him stories from her childhood, anything to keep him awake. His eyes stayed locked on hers. The transport lifted into the sky, leaving the battlefield behind, but none of them looked back. The past was gone. What mattered now was survival and rebuilding what had been lost. Back at the mountain stronghold, the court gathered. Survivors wept when they saw their Queen alive. But when Arali stepped forward, armored, calm, and unbroken, the people knelt to her. She had returned not just as a princess, but as a symbol of hope. And beside her stood a human who had crossed fire and ruin to bring her home. Carter stood beside her, not dressed in royal armor, but in the uniform he had been given, one that now bore the seal of the crown. Asterisk. The stronghold was alive with energy. Messengers ran between towers, pilots prepared new missions, and engineers repaired damaged walls. For the first time in weeks, the banners of Lysara flew high in the wind. Carter stood on the balcony of the western tower, watching the valley below. His wounds had healed, mostly. The pain was still there, but it was distant now, like a shadow. Fading at sunset, Arali joined him, dressed not in royal gowns, but in battle leathers with the emblem of her house stitched over her heart. She stood tall, no longer a child who needed saving, but a leader ready to act. "Tomorrow the offensive begins," she said. "We will take back the capital, and I will stand on the same floor where my people fell and raise our banner again." Carter didn't question her resolve. He had seen it born in fire. He simply said, "Then I'll be right there with you." The Queen held council that night. Around the table were generals, strategists, and resistance leaders. Arali stood beside her mother, while Carter remained just a step behind. Many questioned his presence. A human in a Lysarian war council was unheard of. But the Queen silenced them with a single glance. "This man brought my daughter home," she said. "He belongs here." Plans were drawn. Carter provided tactical support using data collected during their escape. Arali marked the routes they'd used, pointing out weak points and hidden access tunnels beneath the city. The operation was set. At dawn, a full strike would begin. Air units would draw enemy fire, while ground teams would infiltrate through. The old sewer lines Carter and Arali had once crawled through. Arali requested to lead the front unit herself. The Queen hesitated, but then agreed. "You've earned your place," she said. "But take Carter. I won't have you walking into fire alone." Morning arrived with a cold wind sweeping through the cliffs. Dropships lined the valley there, engines humming. Warriors loaded weapons, checked armor, and gave silent nods to each other. Carter stood beside Arali at the lead ramp of their ship. He checked his rifle and gave her one last look. "We ready for this?" he asked. Arali smiled and replied, "We were born ready." Their ship dropped into the city outskirts first. The battle had already begun in the skies. Fire rained down from the enemy towers, but the resistance pushed forward, stronger than ever. On the ground, Arali led the charge. Her voice carried through the comms, giving orders, lifting spirits. She moved through the smoke like lightning, never hesitating, never backing down. Carter fought at her side, clearing corners, guarding her back, always keeping her in sight. Every time he saw her rise from cover, he felt pride swell in his chest. Together, they reached the palace walls. Explosives were set. With a single command, the charges blew, and the gates fell at a blast of fire and stone. Inside, the enemy resisted hard. The throne room was their last stronghold. But Arali didn't stop. She pushed forward with everything she had left. Carter followed her into the heart of the palace, where broken pillars and burning drapes reminded him of the day it all fell. Apart, but this time, they were not running. They were reclaiming. The throne room burned around them, smoke curling through shattered stained glass as enemy commanders fell one by one. Arali's blade moved with purpose, glowing with energy as she led the final assault. Carter fought beside her, blood on his armor, grit in his eyes. He was tired, his limbs aching, but his focus stayed sharp. He had made a promise, and this was the final step to keep it. A final enemy captain stepped forward, tall and armored in black. He raised his weapon toward Arali, aiming for her heart. Carter saw it before she did. He lunged, shoving her aside just as the bolt fired. The blast struck his chest and knocked him backward into the cracked wall. Arali turned and screamed his name, fury and fear in her voice. The captain tried to fire again, but Arali's blade pierced his chest before he could raise the weapon. He fell without a word, and silence returned to the chamber. Arali ran to Carter and dropped to her knees. He was still breathing, his hand trembling as it reached for hers. "You all right?" he whispered. She nodded quickly, tears running down her cheeks. "You saved me again," she said. Carter gave a weak smile and replied, "Always will." Queen Saelith entered moments later with her guards. She looked at the throne, at the bodies, then at her daughter holding the wounded human. Her eyes shone with pride and sorrow together. Medical officers rushed in and lifted Carter onto a stretcher. As they carried him out, he looked at Arali once more and said, "You're going to make a great queen." The battle was over. Lysara had been taken back. The people returned, streets filled with songs of survival and freedom. But none louder than the name of the girl who led them through the fire. Princess Arali stood before the people days later, wearing the golden crown once again. But this time, she wore it not as a child, but as a ruler born in war, and beside her, dressed in ceremonial white, stood the human who had risked everything to protect her. He was no longer just her guardian. He was her legend. When a child in the crowd called out, "Who saved you, princess?" Arali looked to Carter and then to the people and replied with a proud smile, "I'm safe, Mom, thanks to him."